But if as seemed likely at the time that was coming from the house, then the homeowner had a real problem. But the question is, what were the little round black spores? Well, we grew them up in the lab, and they produced yeast colonies, which was highly unusual. And over a period of time, my lab is equipped to do DNA sequencing. And so we isolated some DNA from these samples and got a sequence on them. That, by the way, is a potent tool now for identifying fungi. Well, these things turned out to be smut spores. They weren't coming from the house at all, but from the very heavily infected fields of grass which surrounded this trailer court. And it was very surprising to find such high numbers inside the house. But this is a good example of a situation in which accurate identification of the fungus alters your interpretation of the data enormously. There were other problems in the house. They had a mold problem, no question about it. But this particular air sample, that was not part of that problem. Big outfits, commercial firms just love to send you wet swabs where you take a Q-tip and you find a moldy place and you go scratch, 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 and then you send it off to a lab. We found these worse than useless, to tell you the truth. We refused to accept them for many years. The reason is that essentially all of the structures which you might use to identify the fungus under a microscope are completely obliterated when you do one of these swab samples. And in fact, a much better thing to do is to use a tape lid. That is a piece of optically clear sticky tape which can be pressed against the surface. And in fact, these pictures I'm showing you were all taken from tape lids. So that means the person in the lab has a lot more information in front of him to in fact say what the fungus is. And furthermore, from tape lids, you can actually make cultures and find out which species of Aspergillus or Penicillium you have. And once again, it does make a difference. You can also tell whether the molds are actively growing. Here are some samples. Here are some samples that we got from the plenum in somebody's heating system, where there'd obviously been a lot of condensation going on. And here you've got a nice Aspergillus, a Penicillium over there. You can probably make good guesses about which ones those are. But if we looked a little further, what you see is the spores there are actually germinating. So this just isn't some fossil infestation, but those things are clearly alive and the infestation's active. The spores are still growing. Okay. Now, perhaps we get a little more esoteric. Mold identification. As it happens, household molds are among the most difficult molds to work with, so this is not for sissies. Fortunately, early on in the game, our little consulting firm hired one of my undergraduates who was one of the most gifted people in sort of pattern recognition and taxonomic identification that I've ever seen. And he very quickly became expert on Aspergillus and Penicillium species, which was, in fact, very useful for us. One of the things we found it was possible to do with these viable spore plates, where you're dealing with species, while you perhaps couldn't trust the numbers so much, the many spores that don't grow in plates, or they may be dead, they nevertheless are still of concern. But what we found was that if you looked at the species mix, there were sort of signatures that emerged. And frequently, when the house was sampled correctly, you'd find, well, gee, look at this. We've got this unusual species of Penicillium or Aspergillus, and the concentrations are really high in the basement. If we look in the living room, the same species are still there. If you look upstairs in the bedroom, there are a few spores of the same species that are still occurring. And so it tells you very clearly that you've got a mold problem in the basement, not in the living room and not in the bedroom upstairs, from which a spore cloud is emanating and it's attenuating as it moves throughout the house. And that is very, very useful information for the mold inspector and, of course, for the person who's trying to do something about the mold. It's the kind of information that's much more difficult to get if you're just counting spores in a filter. Tapeless in cultures, well, I've kind of already talked about that. I should say something about DNA-based methods. There's a group who was working with the Environmental Protection Agency who looked at a lot of these difficult fungi that are common in wet situations, particularly species of Aspergillus and Penicillium. And they devised a very clever system of species-specific primers for certain segments of DNA, which are highly variable. And these things were hooked up with a fluorescence system such that you could put it in what's called a real-time PCR machine. If the lab is doing it correctly, in fact, they can give you quantitative estimates of how much of what you've got. And that's very powerful. That's the gold standard. There really isn't any better way to do it. So these primers are available for, I don't know, probably 40 or 50 of the most common indoor molds. What can I say about it? It's expensive. Not that much more expensive than various other things you might do. Not more expensive than a mold dog, for instance, but it is expensive. The other thing is that you only get information about the fungi that they tested for. There might be other things there which you ought to be concerned about, which are less common, and of course these DNA-based methods won't show those because they're not looking for those particular sequences represented by those other fungi. I think those systems are widely used by institutions, often hospitals, for instance, who get a mold problem. They would have the resources to have that kind of analysis carried out. Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff here on mold species and names and all of that, and I'm just going to skip over that because I don't think that's relevant to this group. But I will go down to this slide which says, who cares anyway? So you'll notice on the sample mold reports there that right up front there is a list of incomprehensible Latin names. And why is that valuable to the mold inspector, or particularly to the client? Well, I have some reasons down here. As you undoubtedly know, large mold problems often become the subject of litigation, particularly in apartment buildings, for instance, other places too, but that's common. So, if there's serious health issues involved, if the parties involved have monetary resources, mold cases are, or if schools are involved, heaven help you, mold cases are quite likely to go legal. In that sort of situation, if you happen to be the plaintiff in a case such as this, you want to be sure that you have your mold report from a certified laboratory. And secondly, that species list is the legal basis for your claim. So it may be incomprehensible, but it's important. And it's important because the names provide a key to the literature, where all the, essentially it's the key to all that information that's out there about mycotoxins, about possible health effects, about, are these invasive pathogens? All of that information is keyed on the name. And the name darn well better be correct. It's not something that many mold labs were very good at, frankly. I think the sort of standard is in a mold report, you get told you have Penicillium or Aspergillus. And that's nice, but there are probably at least 100 species of Penicillium and or Aspergillus that are of concern for indoor air. And it could make a difference which one you have.